Somewhere between 70 and 80% of adults in industrialized countries will experience clinically significant neck stiffness at some point in their working lives. That number has been climbing for 2 decades, and in that same period, the market for neck-specific interventions, pillows, cervical traction devices, stretching programs, posture correctors worn around the collar, has grown considerably. 2 trends moving in parallel: more solutions, more stiffness. That's the kind of pattern that deserves a question. Not a cynical question, not why isn't anything working, but a structural one. What if the interventions are well designed for a problem that isn't quite the actual problem? The cervical fascial system, the connected tissue network that determines how freely your neck moves, does not begin at your neck. It extends downward through the thoracic spine and connects through a chain of fascial continuity to the structures that anchor your shoulder blades. Thomas Myers, who spent years mapping these fascial lines and published the findings in anatomy trains, documented this relay as part of what he called the superficial back line. The practical implication is that your neck's mobility is partly determined by tension applied from roughly 20 to 25 centimeters below the base of your skull. You've been working on one end of a rope pulled taut from the other. That's the first thing I want to hold open without resolving it yet. The second is older. Every literate physical culture that developed a systematic approach to body mechanics, and I mean genuinely everyone across geographies and centuries that had no communication with each other, eventually arrived at the shoulder girdle as a precondition for cervical freedom. Not a curiosity, a prerequisite. The convergence is strange enough to notice, and I'm going to come back to it. For now, I want to start where most of the people watching this actually are. You've tried things. You've stretched your neck, side to side, forward, the chin to chest pull, the ear to shoulder lean. Maybe you've had someone work the muscles at the base of your skull. Maybe you sleep with a particular pillow, or you bought one of those cervical rolls, or you've had a chiropractor adjust you in a way that felt extraordinary for 3 days and then returned to baseline. The relief was real. The return was reliable. And at some point you probably asked yourself, quietly, whether you were simply going to manage this for the rest of your life. That question, I want to be careful here because I'm not claiming everyone has the same situation. But that question is, across the observations I've made watching people work through chronic cervical stiffness, one of the most consistently reported experiences. Not the pain level, the resignation. The sense that this is a maintenance problem rather than a solvable one. The reason that resignation develops is not because the neck is a maintenance problem. It's because every intervention has been addressed to the symptom site, rather than the mechanical origin. Here's the version of this that I see most often. Someone has neck stiffness that is worst in the morning or after desk work. They stretch the neck. The cervical tissue gets some temporary relief. The tissue then returns to its previous state of tension, usually within hours. The person stretches again. The cycle repeats. And the question they never get to ask, because they're always managing, is what is pulling the tissue back to tension between each intervention? The answer is not in their neck. The posterior myofascial chain, the connected tissue running from the base of the skull down through the thoracic spine, connecting to the rhomboids and trapezius, with fascial continuity down to the scapular attachments, functions as a single tensional unit. Dr. Carlos Stecco's dissection work at the University of Padua, which examined fascial continuity across these structures in cadaveric specimens, confirmed what Myers' functional mapping had suggested. The tissue is continuous. It is one system with multiple address points, not several separate systems that happen to be adjacent. When your shoulder blades migrate forward, and here I want to be precise about this rather than just saying when you slouch, because the migration I'm describing is subtler than full body slouching. When the shoulder blades drift forward and slightly down from their optimal resting position, which is what sustained desk sitting reliably produces, they apply a sustained tensile load on the posterior chain from below. The cervical end of that system, the tissue you think of as your neck, is the distal end of the tension, It's being pulled from behind and below, constantly, by the repositioned anchor. The fascia at the cervical end responds to this the way all connective tissue responds to sustained tension in a fixed position. It adapts. The elastic recoil, the tissue's ability to recover from movement and return to a neutral, springy state, diminishes. Not through injury, through the simple, value-neutral process of adaptation to a chronic load. Let me redirect slightly before the analogy I'm about to use, because I started to frame this in terms of tissue damage, and that's not quite right. This isn't a damage story, it's an adaptation story. The tissue hasn't broken, it has calibrated itself to a mechanical environment you've been spending 8 to 10 hours in every day. The calibration is the problem. In computing terms, the cervical system is not running a corrupted program. It's running an optimal program for the wrong hardware configuration. Every patch applied at the software level, every stretch, every massage, every manipulation of the cervical tissue itself temporarily resolves the symptom display. But the hardware configuration hasn't changed. The scapula is still forward. The posterior chain is still under traction. The program returns to optimizing for that configuration within hours, because that's what programs do. You cannot patch your way out of a hardware problem. Athletic preparation figured this out earlier than clinical medicine did, in the specific domain where the consequences of getting it wrong are immediately visible. In the throwing sports, shoulder blade stability is treated as a precondition of cervical safety, not because the two structures are obviously connected, but because the pattern of injury in pitchers without proper scapular positioning pointed toward a relay that conventional anatomy hadn't fully articulated. The pitcher who develops early cervical thoracic restriction isn't managed through cervical work. The intervention begins at the shoulder girdle. Think of it this way. A pitcher's arm mechanics create tension that travels up the chain. The elbow and shoulder take load. The cervical junction takes load. When the originating mechanics, the grip, the shoulder blade position at release, are off, the cervical junction absorbs stress it wasn't designed to absorb. The coach addressing a pitcher's cervical complaints doesn't start at the neck. The coach starts at the origin of the mechanical chain. Your shoulder blade is the grip. Your neck is the elbow. Every intervention that begins at the neck is beginning one joint removed from the source. It may help temporarily. It will not resolve the pattern because the pattern doesn't originate there. What happens when you actually change the scapular position? When the shoulder blades are retracted and very slightly depressed, drawn toward each other and marginally downward, the tensile load on the posterior myofascial chain is reduced at its anchor point. The tissue at the cervical end, no longer held under sustained traction from below, recovers access to its elastic potential. This is not an exercise that strengthens cervical tissue. It's not a stretch that lengthens it. It's a mechanical intervention that removes a load that was preventing recovery. The principle governing the protocol that follows is exactly that. The goal is not to do something to your cervical tissue. The goal is to stop doing something to it. The 2 minutes of scapular retraction is not an addition to your body's repertoire. It's a subtraction from the ongoing mechanical pressure that has been adapting your tissue toward restriction. The orientation, standing or seated, whatever is natural. Arms relaxed. No deliberate effort to straighten the spine. Neither forced uprightness nor deliberate slouch. Whatever position your body takes without instruction, the movement, draw both shoulder blades toward each other. The cue that tends to work is imagining something warm pressed flat against your upper inner back and the blades being gently asked to approach it. This is not a clench. It's a sustained, mild approximation. 5 seconds of gentle, held contraction, then 3 seconds of complete release. The release is not optional and is not a rest. The oscillation between loaded and unloaded is itself part of restoring the tissue's elastic behavior. 2 minutes total, roughly 13 cycles. The reason 2 minutes matters rather than 30 seconds, Below approximately 90 seconds of sustained positional work, the change is positional. You've moved the scapula, and it will return to its habitual position relatively quickly. Above 90 seconds, you begin to affect the tissue's resting length preference. The scapular retraction at 2 minutes is not just a momentary repositioning. It's a brief negotiation with the tissue about where neutral is. The question of frequency is a philosophical one, not a prescription. The right time to perform this protocol is at the moment when the conditions that produce the problem have been operating long enough to matter. For most people in desk-based work, that's the end of any session longer than 45 minutes. Not 3 times daily on a schedule, after the thing that creates the load. The protocol is a response, not a ritual. Across patterns observed in people working with chronic cervical stiffness, and this is a finding that has been documented in contexts ranging from clinical physiotherapy to athletic pre-session preparation. The cervical range of motion improvement following 2 minutes of scapular retraction consistently exceeds what the same people achieve from 10 minutes of direct cervical stretching. Not because cervical stretching is wrong, but because it's addressing the correct tissue at the wrong moment in the mechanical sequence. The tissue can only receive the benefit of a stretch when it's not being held under load. You're stretching a rope that's being pulled from the other end. Now here's where the cultural observation becomes more than a historical curiosity. The Swedish gymnastic system, developed by Per Henrik Ling in the early 19th century, formalized into what became the foundation of physical education across much of Northern Europe, placed thoracic opening and scapular stabilization at the foundation of all progressive physical work. Ling's system was built on empirical observation, not anatomy. He and his practitioners noticed that individuals who could not stabilize the shoulder girdle could not achieve or maintain cervical mobility under load. The explanation came later. The observation came from watching thousands of bodies move through structured physical culture. The traditional Thai massage system, which predates systematic Western anatomy by centuries, treats the thoracic posterior chain, the region from the mid-back through the shoulder girdle, as the first site of work in any session addressing cervical complaints. The cervical region is approached only after the posterior chain has been addressed. Practitioners without access to fascial maps or superficial backline diagrams arrived at a clinical sequence that modern anatomy can now explain. Aikido's approach to ukemi, the practice of falling and receiving technique, requires scapular stability and precise shoulder girdle positioning as a prerequisite for cervical safety. The head is protected not by neck strength, but by shoulder mechanics. The reasoning within the tradition is practical and immediate. A practitioner without stable shoulder blade mechanics will injure their neck in falls. The shoulder girdle is the protection, the neck is the protected structure. These traditions didn't communicate their findings to each other. They were working in different languages, different centuries, different theoretical frameworks, and they all arrived at the same clinical sequence. Address the shoulder girdle first. The cervical region follows. That convergence is not a coincidence. It's anatomy. The same anatomy that Thomas Myers mapped and Carla Stecco dissected. The same relay, discovered empirically, independently, across cultures that had no shared vocabulary for what they were finding. The bittersweet part of this is real, and I want to name it plainly. This knowledge was not lost in the sense of being hidden or suppressed. It was distributed. It existed in gymnastics halls in Stockholm, in massage clinics in Chiang Mai, in dojos where the logic of ukemi was passed from teacher to student through practice. What happened in the transition to modern clinical medicine was not a failure of knowledge. It was a success of specialization. The neck became the province of cervical specialists. The shoulder became the province of shoulder specialists. The posterior myofascial relay connecting them became nobody's specific professional responsibility. Specialization produced extraordinary depth in each region. It produced a gap between them. That gap is where chronic cervical stiffness lives for a significant number of people. Managed at one address because the other address belongs to a different clinic, a different discipline, a different appointment. The relay wasn't lost. It was just filed in the wrong drawer. And here's what that means practically. The knowledge is available. The anatomy is documented. The cultural confirmation has been there for a long time. What has been missing for most individuals managing neck stiffness is the reframe. The shift from "my neck is the problem" to "my neck is the location of the problem's expression." This is the synthesis that the whole script has been building toward. Your shoulder blades are the grip. The posterior myofascial chain is the rope. Your neck is where the tautness is felt. Every tradition that discovered this relay, independently, empirically, across centuries, treated the grip, not the rope's distal tension. Modern anatomy can now explain why. The tissue is continuous. Tension applied at one end propagates to the other. 2 minutes of work at the scapular anchor is 2 minutes of intervention at the mechanical origin. Here is the challenge. 14 days. Nothing elaborate, the 2-minute protocol at the end of your next desk session, and for the 13 sessions after that. The measurement is simple and requires no equipment. Notice the moment in your day when your neck first feels restricted. Not how severe, not a pain score, just the moment. Most people in the first week find that moment shifts. It arrives later. Sometimes it doesn't arrive at all during shorter days. Some people find the first week produces nothing and the second week produces the shift. A small number find no change in 14 days, and those cases are genuinely interesting because they suggest either that the scapular migration isn't the primary driver in their situation, or that 14 days isn't sufficient to begin affecting tissue adaptation. This protocol is not a promise. It's a test of a specific hypothesis about the mechanical address of your restriction. The hypothesis is well supported. It is not universal. What's universal is the rope. The rope, that continuous posterior system from the base of your skull to your shoulder blade anchors, has been pulled taut for as long as your shoulder blades have been migrating forward. You now know where the taut end is. That knowledge is the change. Everything else is just going there and doing the work.